After stopping by her city manor to check if any urgent matters from Wardensvale required her attention, Ludmilla strolled out of the north gate of the central district and into the common area of Erantle. She was accompanied by a new hire who went by the name of Lisette, an orphan raised in the city under the auspices of the cathedral, who now worked under Terra as a chambermaid. Ludmilla could almost feel the nervousness coming off of the young woman behind her, though she guessed it was probably due to her being unaccustomed to her new position. Then again, she was hired under the recommendation of the cathedral, and most of the temple staff there treated Ludmilla with a strange sort of reverence that she thought more appropriately directed towards a saint rather than a noble. Sooner or later, however, she figured that Lisette would come to understand how plain and unassuming the lady of House Ziradnik was and settle into a sense of normalcy. If Lisette was determined to be a trustworthy and capable household servant, Ludmilla would send her to the temple to follow in Amelia's footsteps as a maid with divine magic. After a month of study, her lady's maid reported that she was beginning to grasp basic orisons, though the temple staff noted that it still meant that she was at least months away from harnessing first-tier magic. Even so, Ludmilla took it as promising news and an avenue to earnestly explore and promote in her household for the long term. They came to the intersection leading to the demi-human quarter, and Ludmilla felt Lisette draw closer to her as an ogre with a handcart suited to its hulking form came out onto the street leading out towards the northern gate of the city. More and more non-human races were moving into the repurposed paupers quarter of Erantle, but simply having them appear was not enough to acclimate the human citizens to their presence. As with many other long-standing customs and perceptions, only time would probably accustom the residents to radical change. Strangely enough, she thought that her own people, and those who worshipped the Six in the duchy at large, were faring better in respect to the rapidly realigning realities of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. They were a religious minority here in the first place and had a long history of needing to ignore or put up with many things. Be it heathens, heretics, or non-human beings altogether, it practically amounted to the same thing when it came to their daily lives in the duchy of Erantle. As long as their faithful weren't being actively persecuted, and as long as something wasn't trying to eat them, they had grown to be a fairly tolerant lot over the generations. Ludmilla and Lisette turned off of the northern street, and out from behind the odoriferous ogre and its cart, into the western sections of the city. 5 minutes later, they walked up to the front of Linnaeus, and Lisette came forward to open the door to the sound of brass chimes. Much like the first time she had come to the shop, a wave of sweltering heat accompanied the cacophony of scents that billowed out of the entrance. If anything, summer made the experience 3 times worse. With him was the slovenly figure of Germaine Linnaeus, who very much looked like she had melted into a puddle over her countertop. "Welcome." The perfumer half spoke into the glass. "Oh, hey Baroness. What happened with those cooling boxes that you bought?" Ludmilla asked, fanning herself as the prickle of sweat spread over her skin. "I had 'em for a while, but... I wanted to figure out how they made them," Germaine said, "so I tried taking one apart." "I see," Ludmilla frowned. "So it broke?" "It blew up." The perfumer sat up in her seat with a pout. "The arseholes that made it took measures against others copying their work by making sure the thing would destroy itself if anyone tinkered around with it." Ludmilla blinked at her outburst. Was that even legal? What if children tried tampering with the magical item? "Wait," she said, "how large was this explosion? Were you hurt?" "Nothing a potion or two didn't fix," Germaine said as she stood up to walk around the counter. "Problem was that it took out half of my warehouse. Ugh, I'm so behind now." "I can't believe they're allowed to sell something like that here," Ludmilla said. "Does the Empire allow the use of this protection in their markets as well?" "They sure do. I hear the Imperial Ministry of Magic and their affiliates use the same protections for their own stuff, or at least something similar. Buyer beware indeed." She wondered if every magic item was like that. Would all of the street lamps in Erantle explode if someone fiddled around with them? For that matter, she had set the newly migrated members of Xenon to task creating magic items for the everyday use of her subjects. Hopefully, there wasn't anything absurd attached to them. "Your stuff's in the back." The jingle of keys accompanied Germaine's words. "Just come around the counter, the warehouse door is wrecked, anyways." They followed the perfumer through a door at the back of the shop, and Ludmilla eyed the row of alchemical burners adding to the summer heat trapped within the store. Efforts to turn her domain into a more cosmopolitan form that would turn it into a place of note on the map were proceeding apace, but it was often such a vague and colossal undertaking that she just couldn't hold even a fraction of the pieces together in her head. Under the illumination of a row of magical lamps, Germaine led them through a cluttered row of broken shelves and half-swept debris. On the far side lay her order, hundreds of hollow glass arrows, filled with various alchemical oils. She stopped at the edge of the shelves where they were placed. "Luckily, I started on your order after I blew myself up," the perfumer let out a nervous laugh, "else the entire block might have gone up in elemental splendor and pieces of yours truly would still be raining down on the street. You can start stowing them away. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer." Ludmilla took a step forward, then stopped. She had handled the arrows before, but, now that they were filled with volatile alchemical oils, everything seemed just that much more dangerous. "How much force is required to break these now?" she asked. "Hasn't changed from when you've dropped them off," the perfumer answered. "I get how you feel, though. Glass is inert, as far as almost all other materials go, so you won't have problems like acid eating through it while it's sitting in storage." Have you used any of these before?" "I've used a vial of alchemist's fire to kill some cockroaches, once." Cockroaches? They were blocking the entire passage that we were trying to get through." Germaine peered at her suspiciously, but in the end, said nothing. Ludmilla lifted the first arrow from the padded surface of the shelf and held it up at eye level. The hollow point was filled with a clear liquid, and it occurred to her that she had no idea how to distinguish one arrow from another. She went up and down the shelves, taking a few arrows randomly and placing them into her infinite haversack. Returning to the front of the aisle, she stuck her fingers into the magical container, bringing a particular type of arrow to mind. Ludmilla felt a shaft brush against her fingers, and she withdrew it from the infinite haversack and held the point up between herself and the perfumer. "Is this filled with alchemist's fire?" she asked. Rather than look at the head, Germaine bent forward and eyed the fletching on the other end. Yeah, that's right," she said. "I was gonna say that you should have figured out a way to distinguish one arrow from the other. Usually, people tint the glass, but I ended up marking the fletching to tell you which one is which." Ludmilla flipped the arrow over. One of the feathers was marked with a bright red line. "Blue is for frost," Germaine offered helpfully. "Light green is acid, purple is lightning and white is holy water. Yellow is for signal arrows, dark greens are tanglefoot and black ones are thunderclap. The ones with more volume follow the same scheme, but the effects are, well, bigger." Replacing the arrow in her bag, Ludmilla went through drawing different arrows until she was satisfied that the infinite haversack worked the way that Lady Sholtier had described to her. Bringing to mind the arrow type or the color of its fletching called the appropriate one to her fingers, but she decided that drawing them by their content would result in a lower risk of retrieving the wrong arrow. "That bag of yours is really something," the perfumer said. "Containers like that are one of the big goals of every enchanter. I take it that they're not very common." Yeah, right. If they could be so easily made, economies would be turned upside down. An enchanter of sufficient skill has to also have access to fifth-tier magic to make them. I've just started learning how to enchant things this year, but, well, my research has been pretty catastrophic, as you can see." The perfumer made a sweeping motion behind her, to the broken shelves, ruined equipment and shattered glass. Ludmilla still couldn't figure out how such severe security measures could be legal. Was Riestais aware that all these magical items being imported from the Empire had the potential to be violently explosive? Riestais? Germaine scoffed. Maybe 1 in 100 nobles in Riestais could tell you the difference between a magic arrow and a fireball. Even few care for anything beyond a loose description. It's just parlor tricks or a convenience to them, something that either saves them coin, provides entertainment, heals their ouchies, or makes expensive things that they can tax. That's as far as magic laws go in Riestais. Ludmilla briefly reviewed her knowledge of Riestais law, deciding that the perfumer's statement was not far off of the mark. Utility magic was at the forefront of what could be considered common knowledge of magic in Riestais, and few laws were in place for anything beyond how magical goods and services were taxed. The fees for divine magic were entirely out of the hands of the administration, being one of the sole rights held by the temples. She couldn't decide what led to this prevailing attitude amongst the nobility of her former nation. Even after a few months of study as a noble of the Sorceress Kingdom, it felt like terminally fatal ignorance in hindsight. Her prevailing notion was that the lack of acceptance in institutions that promoted magic were probably the true culprits. If one did not know, then one did not know, and the collective mindset of one's peers, entrenched by generations of ignorance, turned into a giant roadblock on the path of knowledge for the entire nation. Breaking this chain of ignorance was central to her fief's policies, as it was the first problem that needed to be remedied if she wanted to promote magical development in her domain. Germaine's tired sigh drew Ludmilla's attention away from collecting her arrows, and she saw the perfumer frowning out at the ruined half of her warehouse. "If you don't mind my asking," Ludmilla said, "are you all right? I mean, your business and all." "I'll survive, if that's what you're asking," Germaine replied. "Arcane vocations make a handy amount at my degree of expertise, so it's not as if I'm going to go out of business and starve. What's really bugging me is that this accident is like having 3 or 4 years of my work go up in smoke." "Did your purchase come with any sort of warning?" "Nope, not a peep. Just thank you for your patronage, ma'am, and off I went." "Maybe it's actually on purpose. The feature only triggers if you take it apart in a way that another enchanter would if they're studying it. It's built to destroy their competition, literally." Ludmilla frowned. Everyday magical items were looking more and more like malicious attempts to undermine rival industries. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Well," Germaine answered, "after the damn thing blew up on me, I was hoppin' mad. I didn't want any more explosions, so I took the other 2 boxes, flew up and dropped them into a rocky field outside of the city. Things just busted apart like normal, with no explosions. After that, I smashed them up really good just in case, but nothing happened. Now maybe I'm just sour over everything, but I think it clearly proves that it was done that way on purpose." "I see," Ludmilla said. "Maybe there should be an advisory for this. Did you let anyone know?" "I went to the Alchemist Guild to see if they could do anything about my losses. They couldn't. Then I went to the Merchant Guild to bitch. Not that they could do anything. They didn't make the things in the first place, and the Empire has a vested interest in protecting their magic item industry. They probably also have a vested interest in not blowing up the property of their suzerain. Maybe. Stuff like that is out of us merchants' reach, though. Maybe you could put in a grievance for me, my lady? Actually, have you given any thought to my proposal from back then? You're evil, you know." Ludmilla turned away from Germaine's glower and resumed gathering arrows from the shelves. She had made her offer before the perfumer suffered her setback, several times, in fact. The vision for her domain grew in depth and complexity as time passed, which in turn allowed her to go into further detail into what she was looking for and what she could offer, yet she was always met with flat refusal. She didn't believe that she was exploiting her in a moment of weakness. Far from it, she believed that they both had much to gain from the relationship, and would be better off in the long run for it. Still, it probably didn't sound that way from someone in Germaine's current circumstances. The last of the arrows on the shelves were gathered, then Ludmilla tried retrieving a few from her infinite haversack again. "So what was your offer again?" Germaine asked quietly. Ludmilla returned the arrow and mentally fumbled around for an answer to the unexpected question. Dealing with business arrangements was really not her thing. She received a great deal of help from her friends when figuring out how she would structure her proposals. "I would like to acquire your business," she said after a moment of silence, "and your services as a talented arcane craftsman. Your shop and warehouse will be retained as a storefront in the city, and you may hire shopkeepers to manage sales and marketing. A new, larger facility will be constructed in my domain to manufacture your products, and you'll move in with a number of apprentices of your choosing. Accommodations will be provided as a part of the terms of your tenure." "Tenure, so I'll be your vassal?" "Well, technically every citizen in the domain is my subject, but yes, you'll have a formal contract of tenure in the form of an honor. If it's not to your liking, I can lower your position to that of a company employee." It was something her friends warned her about. Talented and powerful individuals tended to enjoy their independence, so being formally inducted into a noble house's rigid structure was something that might turn them off from an otherwise attractive proposal. Still, Ludmilla was uncomfortable with the workings of a company, so she at least wanted the heads of the various ventures as her vassals. "An honor, so I'll be a member of the gentry? Dame Linez, or something like that. One of my longer-term goals is to promote a thriving community of magic casters in my territory. While the temples have their own organizational structure, arcane casters have nothing to speak of here. I haven't given much thought to the actual titles themselves, but the title would be independent of your position within the institution that you work for. You know, creating a community of magic casters might be just a bit harder than you think. A few others have mentioned that to me as well, Ludmilla replied. Even the Magician Guild says that the number of magic casters capable of performing second-tier magic is extremely low. With so many mages fleeing after the annexation of the duchy, we've been left in dire straits. The tally made at the beginning of the new administration indicated that there are barely 36 human mages capable of casting second-tier magic or better in the entire Sorceress Kingdom. This includes adventurers and crafters like yourself. Okay, so you know, but you make it sound like you've got some sort of trick to deal with that. It may seem like a trick to some, Ludmilla smiled slightly. But I'm just doing it in the only ways I know how. We'll be attracting as many as we can from elsewhere and identifying children who qualify to be raised as apprentices. They're not exactly novel ideas. The temples have been raising acolytes using the latter method for centuries. I believe that the low rate of professional mages is not due to the inability to rise above the first tier of magic, but the lack of opportunity. It is difficult to make a living wage with low-tier magic due to its oversupply in most places. This, in turn, makes magic casters pursue other professions instead to survive. They never advance because they cannot afford to. So, what, you just plan on paying for all of them? Yes? That's crazy, Germaine laughed. It's not, Ludmilla said. The changes brought about by the Sorceress Kingdom, the effects of undead labor in particular, create a scenario where I can do exactly that. It doesn't even strain my revenues due to the situation of my domain. I'd have to see that with my own two eyes. I hear most of the nobles are in a bind when it comes to implementing undead labor. They got too many tenants and not enough land to adopt the new systems properly. Does that mean you'll be coming to Warden's Vale? Ludmilla asked hopefully. Germaine's smile vanished, replaced by an uncertain frown. What about my research? She asked. That's the entire purpose of this shop, to fund all the things that I wanted to learn in the future. I wanted you more for that than anything else, Ludmilla said. Once you get your new manufactory up and running, you may propose new projects that you'd like to pursue. You might even be able to lead entire teams of researchers if things go well. Everything I come up with will belong to the company? Yes. You'll be credited for your achievements, of course. I don't know too many mages yet, but the freedom to pursue their craft and the recognition of their peers seem to be more valuable than mere material wealth. I guess that sums it up pretty well, Germaine admitted. I'll be upfront and say that what you've been offering me this entire time has been a pretty good deal, too good, actually, but entering the service of a noble means giving up your freedom. I started from scratch, working hard as an apprentice since I was 8, then buying this place and building up my dreams, and then the work that meant the most to me went kaboom. I probably don't have to tell you how much it hurts. Then, an opportunistic noble walks in and offers the chance to get it all back. That's what you're offering, right? I don't know precisely what it is that you've lost, but if it can be replaced by new purchases from somewhere, then yes. As for the idea of freedom, well, my current subjects would say that there are plenty of benefits to being under the protection of a noble, and personally, I have different views on the subject. Oh yeah? Germaine raised an eyebrow. Then if I'm to be your vassal, I'd at least like to know what they are. Ludmilla met her look, wondering what she could say to a talented and independent individual like Germaine Linez. They lived in the same world, the same duchy, even, yet it seemed that they also lived a world apart. Then, as a liege to a promising new vassal, she said, I would tell them that the idea of pure freedom is a childish notion. Though one might not be a literal slave, no one is truly free. All actions have consequences, all things are bound to one another in some way, and the world does not care how you feel about it or if you are even aware of the fact. Those who insist on ignoring this basic truth are some of the most dangerous individuals that can exist. The whimsical notion of freedom that so many feel that they have the right to has no inherent value. It is the price that the world exacts upon you, or what others have paid on your behalf, that ultimately determine what your measure of freedom is worth. Baroness Saradnik, a Class B advisory has been issued for Warden's Vale. Ludmilla froze for a heartbeat, then placed a hand over her ear to indicate that she was receiving a message before turning away. How long ago was this? The bone vultures on extended patrol reported in less than a minute ago. Has the advisory been issued to the territory at large? We are awaiting your confirmation. Then what is it, how far away, and how long have they been there for? A large force of demi-humans was spotted entering the upper reaches from the wilderness to the west. The bone vultures aren't intelligent enough to make a comprehensive report, but it is at least enough to fill the main pass. According to the maps provided to her by Lady Aura, the main pass into the upper reaches was actually the vestige of an ancient highway, built by some civilization lost to time. If the entire pass was filled, then there would be thousands of demi-humans. It was a fair distance away from her borders, but swift raiders with ranger skills could potentially make the trek in mere hours. Then go ahead and issue the advisory. It's well into the evening, but make sure there aren't any loose people out there before you close things up. Send an escort to the logging camp to get the woodcutters safely home. It will be done. Will you be commanding the defense? Yes, of course. I will contact Lady Shiltir before anything else. For now, redeploy the bone vultures and death knights working for the villages, keep the fields and harbor secure. Understood. The message spell abruptly cut off. Ludmilla turned back to face Lisette and Germaine. The price of freedom? The perfumer asked. Every generation of her family had sacrificed their entire lives, paying that price on behalf of so many that barely spared a thought for them, and now her turn had come. Understanding that only those who shared the same history could probably empathize, Ludmilla could only respond with a mirthless smile. Something like that. Lady Shiltir appeared in the center of the garden gazebo, wearing her customary black ballroom gown. Her crimson eyes scanned the garden briefly before falling over Ludmilla, who was standing slightly down the way. Good evening, Lady Shiltir. Ludmilla lowered her head in a curtsy. Good evening, Lady Zaradnik, Lady Shiltir replied. I apologize for the interruption to your busy schedule. Ludmilla straightened to address her liege, but I thought I should head over to see what was going on as quickly as possible. There's nothing to apologize for, Lady Shiltir told her. You're conducting yourself in a manner appropriate to your duties. I'd be remiss in my own if I failed to answer your call. Thank you, my lady. I told you, I feel that I must say this, my lady, Ludmilla said. If this was Riestais, it would have taken days to deliver news of this to Irantal, then a week or more of deliberations while we did what we could to keep these invaders at bay. In the end, if they thought the threat significant enough, the provost might have thrown some coins our way and told us to hire adventurers, then we would have to make a posting and hope that an appropriately ranked team could be hired in time. Ludmilla sniffed, wiping the imagined frustrations gathering in her eyes. I cannot express enough how much it means to me to have a liege that shares the same priorities and responds appropriately, my lady. I hope you will forgive me for my insistence in doing so. Lady Shiltir looked up at her with a furrow on her brow, the light from the nearby street lamp glinting off of her crimson irises. Well, that just makes me angry just hearing about it, she said. Rest assured, nothing of the sort will happen with us. The very idea that our defensive response would be subjected to such a delay is unthinkable. Still, it would have been nice if these demi-humans had waited just one more day. Her words reminded Ludmilla that the lizardman migrants would be arriving from the Great Lake in the morning. Though Lord Mayor's alterations to the Vale were still ongoing, they were to consult with him on the areas where they would dwell and prepare the components for their homes in advance. The timing of the incursion into the upper reaches was quite annoying. It overshadowed the success of the harvest and the sense that a hopeful new life awaited her subjects. If one could move demi-humans around the wilderness at will like that, Ludmilla said, I think it would be trouble for a whole lot of people. The dark portal of Lady Shiltir's gate spell appeared in the gazebo, and Ludmilla made a last-minute review in her head. Will you not be coming, my lady? Ludmilla asked. I half thought you might happily fly off at the opportunity to perform your more familiar duties. There is a proper order to things, Lady Shiltir answered. The individuals who manage specific parts of my territory are also responsible for its defense. I won't fly off and rob them of their duties, and so it is the same for you. Besides, I'll be there tomorrow due to the other thing. The report you delivered to me sounded quite vague, so I'm sure you have a lot of information to gather between now and then. Yes, my lady, Ludmilla nodded. I should get started on that right away. Have a good evening. Lady Shiltir silently waved her away with a smile, and Ludmilla stepped through the gate. She appeared not far from where Lord Mayor had placed his potted tree and startled Mrs. Lynham, who was tending to it. The elf woman fell back, staring at Ludmilla with a face full of consternation. "Good evening, Mrs. Lynham." Ludmilla offered a warm smile with her greeting, but, as usual, Mrs. Lynham did not respond in kind. Well, at least she was moving around beyond the immediate area of her home now. At some point, one of her daughters mentioned that Lord Mayor had left the tree there. From that moment onwards, Mrs. Lynham tended to it during every possible waking hour. At least the tree seemed to respond well to her care. Ludmilla wondered if she would ever figure out what was going on with the beleaguered elf woman. She hadn't worked up the resolve to ask Mary about Lady Aura and Lord Mayor yet, so the entire relationship between all of the elves that she knew of remained a mystery. Ludmilla turned and walked away from Mrs. Lynham before putting away her smile, and the elf woman returned to incessant vigil over Lord Mayor's potted tree. Ludmilla's gaze traveled over the village and its surroundings as she made the short distance to her manor. Despite having the advisory issued to them, the villagers continued working outside, though things were notably subdued compared to how they were normally. The Death Knights stationed at the manor, the warehouse and the village entrance remained at their posts, while pairs of bone vultures circled overhead in greater numbers. The undead helpers assigned to each household now stood outside of their respective homes, armed with the weapons and shields that they had first arrived with. With a good sense of how strong the various undead servitors in her domain were, and their various weaknesses and strengths, Ludmilla thought that the village's defensive arrangement was more than sufficient for the small demi-human raids that the villagers of Warden's Vale patrolled against in the past. This did not include the Death Knights, Elder Lich, and the flock of bone vultures, of course. The situation now was anything but normal, however, and various worries slowly mounted as she ran through various scenarios in her head. "Welcome home, my lady." Willuvian set down her work in the back, coming up to the hall to greet her. She lowered her head respectfully. Ludmilla made the Lynham sisters stop trying to perform the elegant curtsies they were trained to do out of worries for their health, then looked back up at her with a glowing expression. The idea that demi-humans were gathering in the south did not appear to worry her in the slightest. "Amelia didn't accompany you?" she asked. "I did not want to interfere with her studies with this sudden change in schedule," Ludmilla answered, "and there will be little for her to do here anyway. How have things been at home, Willuvian?" "Up until about 20 minutes ago," Willuvian replied, "normal, I suppose." Nonna went about informing the villagers, but she made it sound as if she were announcing it was going to rain in a few days. There's something to be said for that flat delivery of hers. "I am just glad that no one appears to be panicking," Ludmilla said. "Nearly everyone here is from the inland territories. I feared that they would jump into the river and try to swim to Corlin Harbor at the first whiff of demi-humans." Ludmilla produced a pen and a stack of papers from her infinite haversack, placing them onto the nearby desk. Willuvian came around behind her to remove her mantle. "It isn't the first they've seen of demi-humans here, my lady," she said. "There are the two races of the Chronos, then the lizardmen that have been poking around the floodplain for the last few weeks." "I suppose you are correct. They are my subjects now, so I seem to have set them apart from the rest. From your perspective, how have the human villagers been handling their presence?" "Aside from being aware of the occasional Chronos that wanders through," Willuvian replied, "I don't believe they spend much time thinking about demi-humans at all. That's just the way rural villages are, isn't it? The little bit of land that they work on is all that matters. When I was still living in Facet County, it seemed that human villagers didn't receive much attention from the others unless they'd been set on fire by bandits." Willuvian had a point, one that Ludmilla would need to address. The communities within a frontier territory needed to be well connected and communicate with one another to collectively respond to threats, or at least that was how it once was. With His Majesty's undead servitors comprising nearly the entirety of the realm's defense, it was no longer as crucial. Still, she thought it important that every subject considered themselves a part of her domain, rather than solely a member of their respective villages. Heading over to the dinner table, she unfurled the map of the upper reach over its surface. The old oil lamps of her manor had been replaced by magical lighting, making the interior as bright as day. Not that it mattered to her, or the Lynham sisters, or Nonna. Well, it did help Amelia, who was the only member of her household in the Vale lacking in dark vision or something better. She would have purchased them regardless, as a gesture of support for sales of their newest magical item. Wiluvian, she said, would you like to help keep track of things as you did in Facet County? In Facet County? Ah, you mean gathering information and marking it down on the map here? Yes, Ludmilla nodded. We do not have any shadow demons this time around, but we do have dozens of bone vultures. Are bone vultures even capable of speech, my lady? Wiluvian asked. They report to the Elder Liches somehow, but no, I haven't heard them speak at all. Maybe you'll have to coordinate things with Nonna. I'll see what we can do, Wiluvian said. Will you be having Liluvian keeping track of things at night? Yes, you have already divided yourselves into night and day duties since I received this ring of sustenance, so it should give the two of you more to do. I feel like I barely give the two of you any work. You don't do a lot of the things that other nobles usually do, my lady, Wiluvian said, so I guess that's where the lack of work comes from. We've got these undead helpers to speed everything up, too. Wiluvian wandered over to the hall, rummaging through one of the crates stacked along the wall. After finding what she was looking for, she held it up in her hand. May I use the pieces from these as markers, my lady? That is a good idea. Go ahead and commission a large enough set of real markers from Kovalov. We will have to put those ones back at some point. What her maid held in hand was a game board, fashioned into a box that contained its pieces. Warden's Vale had no lack of outdoor activities that her subjects could enjoy, but it was decidedly lacking in recreation for the indoors. With magical lighting slowly being introduced to the villages and each household, she had imported various things for her people to try out. She had brought in many books as well, with the idea that the children learning how to read would find them useful and entertaining, but most books sold in the city were utilitarian in nature or contained other subjects that were decidedly unpopular with most. It was vaguely disappointing. Ludmilla devoured any and all books when she was a child and continued to do so when she had the opportunity, so she thought others might share the same enjoyment. Nonna entered the hall while Wiluvian was arranging the dozens of game pieces along the edge of the map. Report. The advisory has been issued to all of the villages, Nonna said, and your other orders have been carried out. Were there any problems along the way? With the human population, no. The lizardmen were confused, and the Kronos have absolutely no idea what a Class B advisory is. The lizardmen were in the safest position out of all of her subjects, and she was fairly certain that the Kronos would utterly annihilate any sort of demi-human incursion that tried to scale the eastern range. She would inform them of any developments relevant to them once she had a clearer picture of what was going on in the upper reaches. I will speak to them, Ludmilla told her. Have you received any additional reports from the bone vultures? They have been instructed to deliver information from the pass on an hourly basis, Nonna told her. Units on standby will be assigned to monitor known groups as they are identified. Are they capable of that? Ludmilla frowned. You question the efficacy of His Majesty's summons? The bone vultures cannot even detect me when I am sneaking around in the woods, Ludmilla told the Elder Lich. There are plenty of demi-humans much better at it than I am. His Majesty's servants do what they are supposed to. I am under no illusion that they are capable of anything otherwise until it has been determined directly. As far as I know, this is the first time the Sorceress Kingdom's border defenses are being earnestly tested. I do not fancy the idea of our performance being riddled with failure because we choose to turn a blind eye to our shortfalls. Nonna remained silent for several moments, and Ludmilla turned her attention back to the map while the Elder Lich digested her words. Then what is your proposal? Nonna asked. The only proposal I have regarding this is going out there myself, Ludmilla answered. Almost everything better at reconnaissance in the Sorceress Kingdom has been reserved for keeping an eye on major population centers, sent to the new army, or as an adventurer. What of the Kronos? Many of the feline-type beastmen are superior to you in terms of ranger skills. They will have their paws full with what I intend for them. She motioned for the Elder Lich closer to the table before pointing out the eastern range on the map. The eastern range is imposing, but it is not impassable. There are many demi-humans superior to humans when it comes to rugged and mountainous terrain. If they manage to break through there, they will spill into Calling County, putting nearly a quarter of the duchy's total human population at risk. The ideal defensive arrangement will be for the Kronos to hold the range, as it is already their territory. This is as close to a guarantee that we have for eliminating the most problematic avenue that these demi-humans may use, allowing us to focus on other areas. I see, Nonna said. Then you intend to have His Majesty's forces defend the remaining stretch of the border? Yes, Ludmilla nodded, but to figure out the best way to deploy what we have on hand, I need a better idea of what is going on out there. That is why I have settled on taking a look myself. If this area loses its commander, defense will be affected as a whole. I believe I have a way to minimize the risk, Ludmilla said. Have the bone vultures reported any flying demi-humans or monsters amongst this group that came in? We have only the initial report to make inferences from, Nonna said, but it does not seem to be the case thus far. Then in that case, Ludmilla said, we'll be going on a little flight. I will say again that this is highly irregular. This is a highly irregular situation. I am sure the most flexible Elder Lich I know of will be able to adapt. Ludmilla stood upon the pier facing Nonna, who she could swear had an expression of dismay on her face. After some thought, she decided to wait for 2 more hours before heading out, just in case flying demi-humans that could foil her plan were discovered in subsequent reports. During that wait, however, she grew increasingly restless as more and more markers indicating movements were added to the map on the dining room table. The flow of intruders entering the upper reach had not ceased coming through the pass, and Ludmilla wondered how many tens of thousands were now gathered in the southern end of the basin. The slow progress of the markers did ease her fears about raiding forces entering the Sorceress Kingdom shortly after her appearance, yet at the same time added to another set of worries about what sort of demi-human species would advance in such a manner. Ludmilla called in the Elder Lich working with the Lizardman to take over for Nonna's role in conveying the Bone Vulture reports to the Lynham sisters, who were now both awake and working on the map, and increased the frequency of reports to 15 minutes. In addition, she dispatched several dozen bone vultures to sweep over various areas in the upper reaches in an attempt to gain as much information as possible and fill in as many blanks as she could. Between waiting for reports, she sent a preliminary warning to the Chronos across the river, spoke to Chief Ess, then went to the shrine at the top of the hill to pray for guidance. An invasion of this magnitude was nearly unheard of in the history of Warden's Vale, and the sheer breadth of things that she needed to keep track of and think about was overwhelming her. It was as if the statement she made to Lady Sheltier about the inherent weaknesses of the Sorceress Kingdom's various undead servitors had reached the ear of some evil being, and this invasion had occurred as a result to breathe life into her worries. If you are so hesitant about this, Ludmilla said, then perhaps you could provide us with a better option? Wait, by any chance, are you embarrassed? Nonna sighed, the biggest sigh that Ludmilla had ever heard an Elder Lich sigh. It was her final protest, however, and Nonna floated into the air shortly after, hovering out over the water just below the pier. Ludmilla gingerly got onto Nonna's shoulders, placing one hand onto the Elder Lich's hooded head to steady herself. Your robe feels nice, despite how tattered it looks. Ludmilla jerked violently at the sensation of her inner thighs being sharply prodded. The floating pyre wobbled over the water for half a minute before finding equilibrium again. She looked down to see what had happened. I am really sensitive there, you know. I do not. Well, now you do, she scowled down at the back of Nonna's hood. There is no need to grab me so roughly. Even if you do not fancy this idea, stabbing me with those bony fingers of yours is entirely out of line. I did not stab you. Nonna adjusted her grip, and Ludmilla had to resist the urge to wriggle uncomfortably. She should have worn 2 more layers of pants. Crossing her boots at the ankles, she tried to figure out how to brace herself more securely. The Elder Lich's neck was nothing but a bare spine, and the rest of her was similarly thin and bony. She squeezed her legs together lightly. Does that hurt? Ludmilla asked. It is not causing any damage. All right, then we should get going. Ludmilla adjusted the scarf over her head as they slowly rose into the twilight. Recalling how cold it was when she had flown with Lord Mayor, she dressed in layers of winter clothing, hoping that it would be sufficient to stay warm at higher altitudes. In what others would most likely tell her was a bird-brained scheme, Ludmilla decided that the safest way to personally scout the incoming army was to fly over and take a look from out of harm's reach. When they came closer, Nonna would cast invisibility over the both of them, after which they would silently assess the situation firsthand. Unfortunately, Nonna could not maintain the cost of 2 fly spells simultaneously, and a second Elder Lich would be far out of range maintaining a second enchantment in a situation where any number of things might go wrong, such as losing her fly spell. What resulted was their ridiculous-looking arrangement, with Ludmilla riding on Nonna's shoulders. A half-dozen bone vultures rose with them as a makeshift escort, just in case some flying opponent showed itself. The spell's rate of acceleration was cut in half, and so was their maneuverability, but they would be able to achieve the maximum velocity after an extended period. At that speed, it would take them over 3 hours to reach the pass where the demi-humans were making their entrance. Along the way, she peered down intently at the landscape below, trying to spot any scouting or raiding parties sent in advance of the main body of the invading forces. When they reached an altitude where she thought they wouldn't be overheard by anyone below, Ludmilla asked a question. "How come you do not possess any accelerated flight spells?" "If that is a complaint." "No, not at all," Ludmilla said. "I have read that human mages are capable of casting them, so I figured that a powerful Elder Lich should as well." "Enhanced flight exists," Nonna replied, "but it is not in my repertoire of spells." The arbitrary nature of the undead servitors of the Sorcerer King manifested in all sorts of ways, and Ludmilla supposed that this was one of them. Never mind those possessing lesser intellect, or none at all, even the powerful Death Knights and Elder Liches could not learn new spells, abilities, martial arts or skills. They were forever stuck with what they had been created with, and could only work within those constraints. Thus, Lord Cocytus was actively seeking new means to improve them in his new army, and Ludmilla was caught in the same quandary. The servitors leased out to those who desired security forces were undeniably powerful when one thought of them as direct combatants. Unfortunately, the majority of the security in her domain revolved around maintaining a presence on the border and having suitable reconnaissance to pinpoint potential threats. Death Knights, while supposedly capable of destroying small nations on their own, could be sent into the untamed forests of the borderlands and never find a thing unless they happened to trip right over it. Roughly speaking, vocations with high stealth capabilities, rogues, rangers, monks, and bards, became problematic to detect by even Death Knights at around Platinum rank. In an environment with excellent cover, like the forests around Warden's Vale, you could essentially hide forever from one. A ranger specialized in combating undead, like Mary, could probably destroy a Death Knight with enough time, simply because it would never be able to find her as she chipped it down to nothing from afar. Servitors like Death Knights made excellent sentries in the open streets of Erantle, but they were utterly dismal at patrolling places like the Great Forest of Tob or the southern frontier. The clear solution was to have those capable of reconnaissance working together with the powerful undead forces of the Sorceress Kingdom, which was one of the reasons why Ludmilla envisioned training a ranger corps for the nation. That would be a long time in the making, however, and so she found herself flying through the sky on the shoulders of an Elder Lich as a one-woman reconnaissance force. About an hour into their flight, Ludmilla spotted the first signs of the invading demi-humans. From their altitude, which was roughly level with the surrounding peaks, she could see a clearing in the forest being made. They were too far to make out any specific details, but it occupied a stretch of the river below the pass roughly 500 meters long. "Do you see that?" Ludmilla stretched her arm over Nona's head to point in the direction of the clearing. "No. In the valley coming out below the pass, there is a clearing along the river." Nonna leaned forward, and Ludmilla shifted her weight to counterbalance the change in posture. "I still do not see what you are referring to." That was strange. Even from their distance, it should be nearly impossible to miss such a large hole in the forest. Perhaps Nonna did not recognize what she was seeing, or perhaps they had camouflaged their work in a way that required classes with scouting abilities to detect from a distance. She issued orders to one of the bone vultures escorting them, sending it back to deliver the information to Leluvian in Warden's Vale. "What about the bone vultures?" she asked. "Do they see it?" "No," Nonna said after a moment's pause. "Well, keep an eye out," Ludmilla said. "Check with the bone vultures once in a while too. Since undead have dark vision, I figured you would be able to easily see such an obvious clearing. Dark vision has limited range, though it varies by the type of being that possesses it. If anything, it is your ability that is anomalous. Few beings possess natural optical traits that extend beyond 100 meters. Ludmilla wondered what Nonna would say if she told her that her true sight extended as far as she could physically see. She had always assumed that other similar abilities worked the same way, apparently not. Would that mean if I attacked a target 200 meters away in the dark, and they only had dark vision that allowed them to see up to 100 meters away, they would practically have no chance of returning the favor at that range? These traits are only a baseline that individuals work off of, Nonna replied. Various classes confer additional feats or improvements that work in conjunction with natural sensory abilities. You yourself have conveyed this notion in the study of your own capabilities. Your sensory acuity degrades and improves when you lose and gain levels. Yes, you're right. The application of this idea has just never occurred to me before now. You said natural. Does that mean that the arbitrary definitions of tier magic apply much like how they do for area effect spells or flight magic? For spells cast directly, it should work as you describe. If a caster, for instance, casts a dark vision spell on a target, that target should only gain the benefits of dark vision up to 20 meters. Beyond that, they should see as they normally do. What about magic items? This is a matter still under study, as the enchantments of this region have a degree of flexibility, offering a non-standardized selection of magic items. The rules should still apply to each individual item. However, if a magic item confers dark vision of 100 meters, then the user will only benefit from 100 meters of dark vision. Didn't that mean that elven rangers would always inherently be better at low-light combat than human rangers? For that matter, many races naturally possessed dark vision and other sensory abilities that humans did not have. It was no small wonder that humanity only tended to thrive in lands where the sun could drive away the darkness. It was an unexpectedly serious consideration for her future ranger corps that she had taken for granted. She had believed that supplying them with magic items would balance out their natural shortcomings. The bone vultures have noted light sources indicating fires in the area ahead, Nonna reported after several minutes. And you? Ludmilla asked. Nothing yet, Nonna answered. How does the vision of a Death Knight compare? Both Elder Liches and Death Knights have no advanced skills at detection, Nonna said, so, presumably, it should have the base detection radius attributed to its raw level. It is possible that it may be better due to being a superior servitor summoned by His Majesty, but no testing has been conducted for this specifically. I guess we'll need to find out when we get back, Ludmilla said. Our defenses are sounding more and more porous as we discuss them. They continued their flight wordlessly, and Ludmilla spotted 2 additional camps being raised, spaced at roughly 5-kilometer intervals from the first. The demi-humans appeared to be moving completely in darkness, betraying no sign of their presence outside of the camps with torches or smoke through the forest canopy. She ordered Nonna to hover high above the first camp. Below, orderly rows of tents were laid inside, and a sinking feeling developed in the pit of her stomach. Since she could only see their shoulders and the tops of their heads, it was difficult to directly identify what the demi-humans were, but she felt that she already knew. Looking around the campfires spread throughout the tents, she found several figures lounging around. Within a few minutes, another figure appeared, shouting and shaking its fist. The lounging demi-humans scattered at its approach. This is bad, Ludmilla frowned. Head over to the pass. Were we detected? Nonna asked. They are not acting as if we have been noticed, Ludmilla answered. But there are hobgoblins, goblins and bugbears down there. It is a goblin army. If they came from the west, we might be buried in them soon. I fail to understand why this is bad, Nonna said. Reports of local goblinoid populations indicate them to be a minimal threat. In regular circumstances, Ludmilla said, the reports would be correct. Goblins are fairly benign as far as demi-humans go. Well, they're generally weak and they know it, so maybe they just act that way when they're alone or in small tribes to avoid drawing attention to themselves. They usually don't bother anyone when they're like that, and they're not worth chasing around. As they ascended the pass and the vegetation grew sparse, the teeming column of goblinoids was made plain to see. There was no break in the stream going over the pass. When they start gaining in number, she said as they observed the demi-humans passing far below, they become more confident. Or perhaps suicidally aggressive is a more apt way to describe it. Numbers like this will have no qualms swarming over the border for whatever reason they get into their heads. The presence of hobgoblins makes it an order of magnitude worse, as they will train their fellows, turning them into a disciplined and well-organized army with troops that are far more dangerous than the average goblin. Every time this has happened in the past, we worked together with the theocracy to clean them out, but that was with smaller armies formed out of the limited number of tribes in the upper reaches. This army is from elsewhere. It's not unreasonable that we might be dealing with hundreds of thousands of goblins. How strong will the goblins in this type of scenario become? It depends how long this army has existed for, and where else it has been. There are nightmarish tales of goblin armies numbering in the millions, overrunning entire nations. They become stronger as they raid and pillage and improve their equipment, so it rapidly spirals into a threat that nations must band together to exterminate. Fortunately, there has not been any news from the theocracy or Easties about this goblin army, so it is likely they have just formed in the wilderness to the west with whatever crude equipment that they have managed to put together for themselves. Ludmilla fell silent as they approached the top of the pass, trying to estimate the number of demi-humans flowing through. The column coming out of the forest on the western side of the pass seemed endless, and they floated there until the first traces of dawn outlined mountains across the basin. Not wanting to be spotted in the morning light, she ordered Nonna to take them back to Warden's Vale. On the way, they found that 5 more demi-human camps were being raised. She wasn't sure whether the fact that they were taking the time to establish bases was a good or bad sign. It would give her time to organize her defense, should they decide to move north. At the same time, however, they would most likely be adding the local demi-humans to their number as they encountered the numerous tribes living in the basin. There was also the possibility that they would move south, as well. Perhaps she should send word to the theocracy, in the unlikely case that they did not know what was happening along their northern border. When they were far away from the growing number of camps, Nonna broke the silence. "Will you be informing the administration of the developments here?" she asked. "Of course," Ludmilla replied. "It will be included in my request for temporary forces to help deal with this potential incursion." "You believe reinforcements are necessary?" Nonna's voice was incredulous. "There are 11 Death Knights currently stationed in your fief." "They are stationed to defend their respective village areas," Ludmilla told the Elder Lich. "If I take 1 from each fortified village, then use the 2 on standby since logging activities are suspended for the time being, I'll have 5 to work with. This is nowhere near enough to conduct an adequate defense of the border. The administration will understand the rationale that accompanies my request.